Tēnā tātou katoa, good evening. Strap in, New Zealand. We are about to have a very different kind of government. For the first time in our history, it'll be a three-party coalition, and a lot of change is coming your way, including 2 deputy prime ministers. New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters and ACT Leader David Seymour will share the job, splitting the 3-year term in half, with Winston going first. In terms of policies, National managed to get its tax cuts across the line, sort of. Most Kiwi households will get a tax cut from July, but plans to fund it with a foreign buyers tax are axed. For landlords, however, tax cuts are coming sooner. ACT has secured support for a bill on defining the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, but there will not be a referendum. New Zealand First has won a COVID inquiry which will investigate the efficacy of the vaccine and the use of multiple lockdowns. Fair pay agreements will be gone by Christmas. 90-day trials are back, and beneficiaries will be subject to harsher sanctions, including electronic money management in some cases. On the chopping block, brace yourself because there is a lot. The world first legislation designed to create a smoke-free generation is gone. The Māori Health Authority scrapped. Infrastructure projects including light rail, Let's Get Wellington Moving and the Lake Onslow electricity scheme all next. Māori names for most government agencies will be gone, and Three Waters, well, it is dead in the water. But there's a whole load of new policies to replace them. We have comprehensive coverage starting with political editor Jenna Lynch. So Jenna, how did the announcement go down?
After 41 days, the cone of secrecy lifted, and boy, there was a lot hiding under there. Shared responsibilities and near on 30 pages of small type font in these agreements, which will dramatically change the direction of this country. Ready, set, govern. Just steady the pace. Finding their formation and striding into power together.
What we have achieved together, I think, is historic, because it is in fact the very first time in New Zealand's MMP history that we have had a 3-party coalition government with all parties represented in Cabinet.
Sharing the baubles between them.
I will be the Prime Minister, Mr Peters will be Deputy Prime Minister for the first half of the term, and Mr Seymour will be for the second half.
Finally speaking as one after weeks locked away in secret talks.
I'm here with ACT Leader David Seymour and also New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters, and I want to publicly thank both of them for the way in which our negotiations were conducted so professionally and with goodwill and with good faith.
I have worked with Winston Peters and Christopher Luxon, and what I can tell you is that while the negotiations have been robust, so has the growth in respect amongst us.
These were seriously long, difficult and complicated talks, arduous in the extreme, and we expected nothing less.
The 3 newfound amigos' first spin at the podiums of power was a wild ride. Winston Peters took just 45 seconds to return to form.
Please do not be mathematical morons.
His coalition partners clearly uncomfortable, having to rein him in already.
Yeah, you want to argue with me? You should have been there before the election. Maybe I'd have got more votes.
All right. Okay.
So back to the point here.
Kicking off once more when Newshub dared suggest he was sharing the Deputy Prime Minister role with David Seymour.
A question for the 2 new co-deputies. Do you agree with
We're not co-deputies.
No.
Get it right for a start.
to the 2 people who are sharing the Deputy Prime Minister?
No, we're not sharing it either. I'm taking the first 18 months and David's taking the second 18 months.
Okay, right. Okay, so
Every parent in the country knows that when you're taking turns at something, that's a form of sharing.
Asked if they all trust each other, off he went again.
We don't answer stupid questions. Please understand what real life looks like for adults.
Well, it's not a stupid question because, David Seymour, you called him the most untrustworthy politician in New Zealand.
I trust all ministers in our Cabinet. That's how Cabinet collective responsibility works, and that's how I'll operate.
Trust or not, they are now wedded to one another. The deal is done. This is the coalition government. The 3 wise men came bearing the gifts of their gruelling negotiations.
It's in our coalition agreement. We went to the wire for our people in the same way that David Seymour did for his, and Mr Luxon did for his as well, and that's the nature of these coalition talks.
National convinced the others to adopt its entire 100-day plan, crucially its tax plan, except they're going to have to find some more money to fund it.
As part of National's proposed agreement, National's agreement with New Zealand First, the proposed foreign buyer tax will no longer go ahead.
The 3 promising better government and a more unified country.
We, in New Zealand First, for our part, know that there's going to be a much, much better government.
Unite New Zealand under our similarities rather than divide us.
But they're embarking on a controversial agenda, a broader inquiry into the COVID response, including the efficacy of the vaccine and lockdowns, fought for by Winston Peters.
All we're saying is we want to broaden the terms of the COVID inquiry so it considers more things.
Transformative changes to treaty interpretation and Te Reo Māori use, removing the Māori names of government departments and requiring them to communicate in English.
We will no longer be treating people differently based on ethnicity as a starting point. We will be focusing public services on need.
And wading into the gender identity culture wars, with New Zealand First's pledge to strip gender, sexuality and relationship education out of school curriculum, along with a policy around gender in sport.
This is definitely going to be a government that is going to drive New Zealanders apart and lead to more polarisation of the country than we have seen to date.
Democracy delivered us this government, now over to them to deliver their promise of strong and stable.
Well, Jenna, we've waited a long time for these three to come to an agreement. Today they put up a unified front. Do you think that they can maintain it?
Judging by some of the faces and reactions to some of the more bizarre moments in the room in that press conference, I think there's going to be a couple of teething issues here. The other two leaders were perhaps expecting a more dignified tone from Winston Peters to match the moment, but as everyone knows, don't ever assume what Winston Peters is going to do. Today we got an insight into what those coalition talks might have been like behind closed doors, what the hold-ups were, what that final squabble over positions might have looked like, and how it ended with that compromise that Winston Peters seems only just okay with, how the sequencing was decided, Winston Peters going first. I understand that Winston Peters went in with a big pitch of experience and David Seymour ceded it easily, but this sequencing might actually work quite well for the coalition. Talking to sources from the 2017 term, 18 months in, Winston Peters started getting a little bit itchy and to actively start campaigning for the next election, campaigning against the government he was part of. That's when David Seymour can take over, and that's when some of the policies will start coming into effect so he can campaign on those. Because remember, these parties are not just thinking about the next 3 years of government. Their job with these coalition agreements as well was to have something to campaign on for the next election, because they are well aware that smaller parties often get gobbled up in government.
Indeed they do. Jenna Lynch there live from Parliament, and we will come back to Jenna shortly for some more analysis. Well, the Provincial Growth Fund has risen from the ashes, albeit with a new name.
New Zealand First's flagship policy is now called the Regional Infrastructure Fund, and it has $1.2 billion in it. As political reporter Lloyd Burr explains, it's one of many policy concessions Winston Peters has secured.
We're back. Okay.
Back in Parliament, back at the podium, back in power.
Personally grateful to have the chance to do it again.
Doing the Provincial Growth Fund again. It was the cornerstone of their coalition agreement with Labour in 2017. It's been renamed the Regional Infrastructure Fund, filled with $1.2 billion, and has the same minister, Shane Jones.
There's a host of new projects that have already been thrown in my direction.
National Enact throwing shade at the fund during its first incarnation.
That is a giant waste of money.
Time to start calling the Provincial Growth Fund what it is. It is the Shane Jones re-election fund. To call it pork barrel politics would be offensive to pigs.
But today, David Seymour changed his tune.
We've got a coalition government that is going to be very focused on making the best possible use of every taxpayer dollar, and I'm sure that together we can make good investments that benefit regional New Zealand, and I'm sure that New Zealand First with Shane Jones and Winston Peters will have a good insight in how to do that.
The Regional Slush Fund, one of many policy wins for New Zealand First. Prisoners will be put to work building new prisons. The live animal exports ban will be scrapped. They'll investigate reopening Marsden Point oil refinery, and they'll restart offshore oil and gas exploration.
Does that match with our climate change goals?
Well, obviously those matters have to be teased through our cabinet process.
You cannot stop climate change by using more fossil fuels.
In discharging that role, I will not be dissuaded or distracted by emerald dragonflies.
Fees-free stays, but the final year will be free, not the first. The pension age remains at 65. Government departments must have English names and communications apart from ethnic-specific ministries, and they'll repeal the smoke-free generation law, which outlaws cigarettes over time.
We think there's issues around a 36-year-old can smoke, but a 35-year-old can't. We just think some of that doesn't work.
They've decided to prioritise the tobacco lobby over the health of all New Zealanders.
New Zealand First has also got a commitment not to change the name of New Zealand unless there's a referendum. They'll also legislate to make English an official language, and they'll look at implementing degrees of murder like they have in the United States.
The party gets 3 cabinet positions. Winston will be Deputy Prime Minister until the 31st of May 2025 and again picks up foreign affairs and racing. Shane Jones gets oceans and fisheries, regional development, resources and the associate finance and energy roles. Newcomer Casey Costello picks up customs and seniors as well as associate health, immigration and police portfolios.
Casey Costello is a serious experienced police person, investigator, and with a serious record of respect out in their community.
Nationals held on to the agricultural ministerial portfolio, but Todd McClay has an astonishing 3 associate ministers beneath him. Mark Patterson from New Zealand First, Andrew Hoggard from ACT, they're both farmers, and Nicola Grigg from the Nats.
Was there a bit of squabbling over the agricultural portfolio? Is that how it ended up this way?
No, I don't think I'd call it squabbling, but there's a lot of interest. If you look at the 3 parties, there's a lot of policy put out and a lot of campaigning in this area.
Sharing roles, the common theme in these coalition agreements, some might even call it co-governance. Lloyd Burr, Newshub.
And on the other side of the governing arrangement, ACT has also managed to secure itself some big positions, policies and public service cuts.
It didn't get its wish for a referendum on the Treaty of Waitangi. Instead, the law could change without putting it to the people. Political reporter Amelia Wade explains.
A big day not just for David Seymour, but all the sniffle sufferers too.
Pseudoephedrine-based medication available again next winter for those who have suffered so badly.
The wonder drug for colds among ACT's coalition bounty.
I believe that we have made a positive and substantial contribution to this government's agenda.
Starting with the baubles, which just this week Seymour promised he never wanted.
I've always said that policies for people are more important than positions for politicians.
In Cabinet, as well as getting half a term as Deputy PM, Seymour is the brand new Minister for Regulation and will be in charge of overseeing charter schools and changes to Farmac. ACT Deputy Brooke Van Velden is the new Internal Affairs and the Workplace Relations Minister. Nicole McKee is the Minister of Courts and will be responsible for firearms as Associate Justice Minister. Outside Cabinet, there's former Fed farmer Andrew Hoggard with a number of associate responsibilities, and Karen Chur will be the Minister for Children and for the prevention of family and sexual violence.
Karen Chur completing an extraordinary journey from a victim of SIPS to the Minister for Children with the power and opportunity to make that dysfunctional organisation work.
On the policy front, ACT won a rewriting of the Arms Act and a review of the gun register, charter schools, a return of 90-day trials for workers, making it easier for landlords to evict tenants, but introducing pet bonds to make it easier for tenants to have pets, introducing a bill to get a 4-year parliamentary term, and deeper cuts to the public sector.
The commitment to reduce non-essential back office civil servants back to the levels we saw in 2017.
ACT has also secured harsher penalties for beneficiaries, like electronic sanctions.
People are really scared at hearing that today. I've already had people in contact. That is going to make life harder for them.
Gone are Three Waters, Auckland Light Rail, Let's Get Wellington Moving, Income Insurance and the Lake Oslo Pumped Hydro Project. Co-governance and public services scrapped. And instead of a referendum on the treaty, which Luxon consistently ruled out,
as I don't think that's helpful. I think it is divisive and it's not something we're supportive of.
They're doing it without taking it to the people by introducing a treaty principles bill.
The reality is that what Mr Seymour's asked for, he's got.
Isn't it less democratic to push that bill through Parliament and not take it to a referendum to the people?
Well, our view is that we have said our government is actually going to support the passing of that bill through the first reading into Select Committee, and that is the extent of our commitment at this stage.
They haven't even been sworn in yet, but already the minor parties are jostling over who is dismantling the influence of the treaty more, with New Zealand First also securing promises to narrow the scope of the Waitangi Tribunal and to review almost all legislation which has references to the principles of the treaty.
A government that's intending to whitewash Aotearoa and wipe out Indigenous peoples.
This is certainly going backwards by 3 or 4 decades. It is going to turn progress back on Māori issues by a very, very long shot, including progress that was made under national governments.
Whether you're Māori, non-Māori, old, young, you expect us to work hard.
And what hard work it will be, going near the treaty without the debate turning toxic. Amelia Wade, Newshub.
Oh, we're going to go back to Jenna Lynch now. So, Jenna, a big day. Was there a winner?
I think all 3 parties will be claiming the win here and expect them to keep doing so all the way through the term. This is a true MMP government. National has obviously learned from Labour's 2017 experience in coalition, where they figured out that unless it was written in black and white in their coalition agreement, they could never count on New Zealand First supporting it. So National has secured in here support for its 100-day plan, its tax plan, its fiscal plan and its 100-point economic plan. But boy, it had to concede a lot to these smaller parties to get there. They have really shown their negotiating might, both ACT and New Zealand First, dragging National away from its comfortable centrist territory. On Monday, the coalition government will be officially sworn in and the clock will begin on their 100 days.
Jenna Lynch, live from Parliament. Thank you.